And then there you have it. So Happy New Year all. It is 2021. I think this is our first training in the new year. I am thrilled to be back with you. I am Becky Facina with Alliance Health. I am their community education specialist in Johnston County. I work out of our Smithfield office when I get to go back to my office. And right now I'm in my upstairs hideaway working from home. And today we're going to talk about working with at-risk populations. And so a little bit about ourselves, for those of you that may not have joined us in our previous trainings, I like to kind of review and set the stage of who Alliance is and what we do. And so we are the local management entity, managed care organization for public behavioral health care in Durham, Wake, Cumberland, and Johnston counties. And we're public behavioral health care right now in this moment, but as Medicaid transformation begins to roll out, we will actually be taking on whole person health care. So not just focusing on the behavioral health care, but also that physical health component as well. So we will be really changing a lot of what we're doing internally and externally. So look for those changes in how we operate coming soon. We currently serve approximately 471,000 plus Medicaid eligible and uninsured individuals, among a total population of over 1.7 million. We manage a network of providers. There's about 2,000 providers in our network, ensuring quality care is received, as well as helping individuals access care and navigate systems. And that's a big part of what I do is connecting with individuals and helping them access care that they may need. And we do have a 24-hour access and information line there. It's that 1-800 number, 510-9132. Two programs we want to highlight or resources that have been established recently due to the pandemic. North Carolina's Department of Health and Human Services have established 2 mental health resources to help North Carolinians cope and build resilience. We're going to be talking about resilience today during times of crisis, including the COVID-19 pandemic. The Hope for NC helpline, that's the one that's in front of you there. That's the 855 number. It connects North Carolinians to additional mental health and resilience supports that help them cope and build resilience during times of crisis. Typically, Hope for NC, you have seen this in past years when we've had hurricanes come through, but this FEMA grant, these FEMA dollars are specifically for the COVID-19 pandemic. It's available to everyone in North Carolina's 100 counties. During the crisis, Hope for NC includes a crisis counseling program tailored for COVID-19, which will provide immediate crisis counseling services to individuals affected by the ongoing COVID-19 public health crisis. This initiative is in partnership with all 7 of the state's LME MCOs and Real Crisis Intervention out of Greenville. Hope for NC is available 24 hours per day, 7 days a week to speak to a live person. And then the more recent addition to the work that we're doing in North Carolina is the Hope for Healers helpline. And it's a new initiative in partnership with the North Carolina Psychological Foundation. It provides mental health and resilience supports for healthcare professionals, emergency medical specialists, first responders, other staff who work in healthcare settings, and their families throughout the state who are experiencing stress from being on the front lines of the state's COVID-19 response. Most recently, they've actually added our educators to this program as well. So if you know of an educator that is having some difficulties, having some challenges, maybe in crisis, or maybe doesn't know where to turn or experiencing loneliness, they can also access this number because we know that educators are healers as well. They just heal a different population. And Hope for Healers, again, is also available 24 hours per day, 7 days a week for people to reach out for support from a licensed mental health professional. We've been pushing the scoop on managing stress. We know it's important to make sure you are taking care of your mental health. Behavioral health is core to our overall health. As we've learned if you've joined us in the resilience screenings, the resilience film screening, we know that behavioral health really has an impact on our whole body health. And the COVID-19 pandemic is an extraordinary event. So we know it's normal that individuals are experiencing significant behavioral health impacts. There are actions that you can take and resources available to help maintain your mental health. Specific steps you can take regularly to improve and maintain your mental health and well-being are listed here. And so those are staying connected to family and friends, compassion for yourself and others, give yourself a little grace, observe your use of substances. This is one of my favorites, the second O. It's okay to ask for help. We've also said it's okay to not be okay. It's all right. We all have those days and moments in time. And then P, making sure that you are getting the physical activity, because we know physical activity improves your mood. So now we've kind of can put that all in a nutshell and move on now to kind of the meat and potatoes of our presentation today, which is working with at-risk populations. This presentation is a little less than an hour, and when I timed it the other evening, but again, if you've got comments or questions, please put those in the chat box. And so look at this, overcoming adversity. Part of overcoming adversity is having the presence of mind and the resources available to transcend one's circumstances. And I'm going to say that again. It's having the presence of mind and the resources available to transcend one's circumstances. The American ideology that drove massive immigration booms in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the idea that anyone can succeed regardless of income, race, etc., conveniently omits a really important detail. To be certain, people born in the bleakest of situations can and have reached great levels of success. We know that, but they don't start in the same position as ethnic minorities born in affluent areas. We know that race and income aren't the only two determinants that can make a population vulnerable. So a person's age, their gender, identity, their education level, and many other factors can greatly affect their success. Today, in this presentation, we're going to take a closer look at 5 of the most vulnerable populations and the problems that shape their circumstances. And so before I show this slide, I want to see if you can come up with one or more of the 5 vulnerable populations we'll be discussing today. And if you want to pop those in the chat box, we'll see if any of you all hit the nail on the head in guessing which populations we'll be discussing today. Okay, Muslim population, possibly. Anything else? Let me give you a better look. Now, based off of the pictures here, which populations do you think we will be discussing today? Correct. Children, homeless, absolutely. The elderly. So exactly right. Children, the LGBTQ community, the incarcerated, those individuals with a low socioeconomic status, and the elderly. Those are going to be our 5 vulnerable populations we're going to discuss. So I'm going to start with children. This population is vulnerable for several reasons. First, in the case of child abuse, children are often too afraid to report their parents, or they're unaware that they have the option to do so. They may feel conflicted, hesitating to report abuse out of loyalty to their caregivers or someone that they know. Oftentimes, abusive parents take measures to ensure that their children don't report them, including the threat of greater punishment and manipulating them into believing the behavior is normal. And we hear that a lot. Oftentimes, our young people that have been abused, they never thought that that was what was supposed to happen. They didn't know that there was another way of being. This is especially prevalent in cases of sexual abuse, which is one of the most common forms. And according to DoSomething.org, and I'll put this in the resources, DoSomething.org, 1/3 of all girls and 1/5 of all boys will experience sexual abuse before they reach 18 years of age. I'll let that sink in for a second. 1/3 of all girls and 1/5 of all boys will experience sexual abuse before they reach 18 years of age. And so as we see, clearly our children are an extremely vulnerable population. And so what do we do about it, right? If you were in my resilience training a month ago, several months ago, I can't remember when we did the training, but the film and the discussion that followed, it really talked about resilience. And what we know about resilience is that we can build resilience. We can teach it. And so what we want to be able to do is focus on resilience for our children and ways to build it in our children. Resilience really does matter. And so you may not be able to see it quite clearly in the infographic because it's small, but I'm going to give you some outline and some details about it. There's actually 12 ways in this infographic, and I'll send this to you as well. 12 ways to build resilience in children. And so number one is self-esteem, right? Boosting up their self-esteem. Letting them learn from their mistakes. That's really important. It's okay for us as adults to make mistakes, and it's okay for kids to make mistakes. Understanding and acceptance of their strengths and weaknesses. Having self-control, so being able to teach self-control. Being able to teach them coping strategies. They should have those tools in their toolbox to be able to cope when things don't always go their way. A willingness to overcome difficulties rather than avoid problems. So teaching them that. Teaching them optimism and how to be optimistic, right? The glass is always fuller instead of the glass is always half empty mentality. Social skills. How do I communicate? How do I engage with other individuals? Giving them problem-solving skills. Being connected to their school and community, making sure they're connected to at least one individual in their school or community. Giving them the ability to recognize their own emotions and that of others. That's a really important one, to be able to not only recognize your own emotions, but be able to recognize emotions in others. It's how we build relationships. And then finally, goal setting with realistic expectations. I think oftentimes in this day and age, we set goals or help our students, our children set goals. And oftentimes we need to make sure, are they realistic goals, right? We don't want to be setting them up for failure. We want them to reach the stars. We want them to have lofty goals. But really, are they realistic? And digging a little bit deeper, I like this graphic. I'm just human. I have weaknesses. I make mistakes and I experience sadness, but I learn from all these things to make me a better person. And again, I'm going to put a link to this article in our resources, but in this article, I'm learning from mistakes, helping kids see the good side of getting things wrong. It's really important that we teach our kids how to make mistakes, and that it's okay to learn, to make mistakes and to learn from making mistakes. And so those types of things are acknowledging that you don't expect them to be perfect, right? Not a single one of us is perfect. Let them know that your love is unconditional, or that your care for them is unconditional. It may not be a child that is appropriate for you to express that you love them unconditionally. So you may say that you care for them unconditionally, regardless of their mistakes or lapses in judgment. Don't rescue them from their mistakes. Instead, focus on the solution. It's really important. Provide examples of your own mistakes, the consequences, and how you learned from them. Encourage children to take responsibility for their mistakes and not blame others, not playing the blame game. Avoid pointing out your child's past mistakes or their past mistakes. It might not be your child, it might be a child. And instead focus on the one at hand. Praise them for their ability to admit to their mistakes. Praise them for their efforts and encourage them to overcome setbacks. Mentor them on how to apologize when their mistakes have hurt others. And then help kids look at the good side of getting things wrong. Now, when we look at the LGBTQ plus community, this is the now well-known acronym, right? LGBTQ plus. It refers to a set of sexual identities: lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer, respectively. In recent years, several other terms have surfaced surrounding sexual identity, including non-binary, gender fluid, and more. In all cases, these populations are regularly subject to discrimination on both a personal and societal level. Transgender individuals, especially women of color, are disproportionately affected by hate crimes. In 2017, 29 transgender people were reported murdered. All groups within the LGBTQ plus community have experienced violence on an elevated scale, and the threat of it squanders their ability to thrive in communities all over the world. I can attest to this. When I was a principal in Washington, D.C., I had a transgendered student that was murdered. She was stabbed to death. And so I have seen it firsthand. On a political and institutional scale, LGBTQ plus individuals are subject to various forms of discrimination in the areas of employment, housing, education, and other sectors. Ongoing legal battles about separate bathrooms for transsexuals, military service restrictions, and so on only serve to complicate and confuse the community's rights. It's important to understand that this population faces a very unique and frequently changing set of challenges, and primarily it's because of ongoing policy changes, which we've had a policy change now that President Biden has just come into office. And that each sex or gender identity within the community is its own population. So when working with the LGBTQ plus community, one must be resourceful enough to connect disenfranchised members of the community with services that circumvent institutional and personal discrimination. And I will say this again, from my own personal experience, trying to be able to connect the LGBTQ plus community with resources within their community is oftentimes very difficult. I know here in Johnston County, I think I know of 2 resources or organizations or groups that work with or that are in support of or that are specifically for the LGBTQ plus community, one of which I think has gone defunct. And so their resources are really limited here, at least here in Johnston County, in these rural communities. I can tell an individual, there are lots of places in Raleigh where they can reach out to people, and there are groups and organizations and all kinds of resources to them. But if that individual is lacking transportation, or that individual is lacking, there's some other barrier preventing them from getting to Raleigh, they don't have access. So something to be mindful of, that oftentimes, at least I have found in my experience here, that resources are really quite limited for this population. So let's look at our third vulnerable population, and this is the incarcerated. More than 2.3 million people are currently incarcerated in the United States. And I last looked up this number on December 3rd when we had originally scheduled this training. So as of December 3rd, and I'll have to look up the new number, as of December 3rd, there were 30,380 prison inmates in North Carolina. Prisoners suffered from increased rates of mental illness, depression, and suicide. They also battle learning disabilities, sexual harassment, and a number of other issues faced by the outside population. This population is more vulnerable than most for multiple reasons, and many of you may know this better than I in the work that you do on a daily basis. But prisoners have limited contact with the outside world. Their negative thought patterns worsen when they can't reconcile with the people that they hurt in the past. Their relationship with family and friends is weakened by their incarceration. They lose out on financial and educational opportunities. And so when working with this population, it's vital to reduce the discrepancy between the number of prisoners that need help and the number of prisoners that receive help in our overcrowded penal system. Assessing and justifying the need for mental health services is imperative, as well as focusing on a successful reentry into society. And I know reentry is extremely important because if we set our incarcerated individuals up for failure, the likelihood of them reoffending and going back to jail is very high. This can entail several efforts, including, but not limited to, marriage and family counseling services, educational programs in prison, job and life skills training, drug and alcohol counseling, and behavioral therapy. And we know sometimes this is available to our prisoners, and we know sometimes these things aren't available. And so doing our best and looking at the system as a whole and trying to set up those individuals for the best possible outcome they can have once they set foot outside of those prison walls. And looking at low socioeconomic status, that's our number 4 vulnerable population. The correlations between education level, income level, homelessness, and socioeconomic status are so strong that it's nearly impossible to statistically separate these terms. According to First Focus, child poverty is a particularly potent cause of homelessness, dropout of school, and even turning to crime. So say that again. Child poverty is a particularly potent cause of homelessness, dropping out of school, and turning to crime. Children who are poor are less likely to attend school regularly because of frequent changes in housing status, reliance on financial assistance, and lack of the necessary school supplies. I know as a former school administrator, my students primarily came from a low socioeconomic status, and oftentimes I would see students miss school time and time again because they didn't have an address, they had moved, they didn't have the necessary clothes, they didn't have the appropriate whatever it was to get them to school, and so therefore they missed school. And this really does kick off a downward spiral involving the infrequent attendance of a low-income area school that spends hundreds of dollars less per student than schools in other regions, a greater propensity for crime, and a higher likelihood to become either incarcerated or homeless. And to best address the many issues correlated with a low socioeconomic status, a thorough needs assessment must be conducted. Poverty, lack of education, and homelessness affect everyone differently, And each individual has to be motivated in a way that compels self-sufficiency. That's a big one, being self-sufficient. So when working with this population, one must remember that we should be coaching our way out of the individual's life, not the other way around. And that's really important. Coaching our way out of the individual's life and not the other way around. We want them to be able to sustain themselves and be self-sufficient. Hope being the driving force, we must always do what we can to inspire hope in all that we meet. There's not a one-size-fits-all solution. It really must be person-driven. And so I'm going to go back to that term we talked about a little bit ago, which is resilience and resiliency. And so this graphic here has the person as that fulcrum, listing things about the individual. So genetics, DNA, resilience, their ACEs score, their life story, their personality, right? And so that's the fulcrum. The fulcrum can move depending on the individual aspects noted above. On the left of the lever are the hard things, right? The stressors. We talked about that in the resilience film. And then on the right are the good things and the resources, or maybe the protective factors, as we call them in the resilience film. And these good things and resources are where resiliency can rest. Resiliency is when the scale tips toward the good, even when there are stressors and hard things. And so I really love this graphic. And because, you know, we talked about resilience just a few slides back with children, but we know we can also teach resilience in adults. And so if we look at those good things, so being able to connect them with a doctor that they trust, right? We can do that as an adult. We can connect them with a doctor that they trust. Having safe housing, right? It is possible. We know housing is a much larger issue than what we can address here today in this short presentation, but getting them safe housing, right? Dependable transportation, depending upon where we're located. There may be public dependable transportation, right? Getting them dependable transportation. These are things that we can help with. Again, help with. We want to be able to be working our way out of their lives, not in their lives, and being able to get them to sustain themselves. But again, I wanted to note this and highlight this, that building resilience is not just in children and in young people. We can build resilience in our adult population as well. And so our final group of vulnerable people are the elderly, right? And though this subject is not publicized as passionately as child abuse, elder abuse is a very common issue in the United States and other regions of the world. Many people picture a nursing home employee taking cash from an elderly person's room, like that's oftentimes the thing that we think of, but elder abuse takes many other forms, and we're gonna look at those. And so these are the three most common forms. So neglect, physical, verbal, or sexual abuse, financial exploitation. And when we look at neglect, right, this can be whether it could be a family member, a caregiver, or anyone else responsible for taking care of an elderly person. Neglect involves the failure to provide the minimum level of health and safety. This includes hydration, food, shelter, hygiene, and so forth and so on. The minimum level of health and safety. When we look at physical, verbal, or sexual abuse, like with any other population, the elderly demographic is not immune to physical, verbal, and sexual abuse. This includes physical harm, verbal abuse, so insulting them, humiliating them, threatening them oftentimes because we know that they can't fight back, and sexual abuse, which may include inappropriate touching and even sexual acts. And then finally, we look at the growing number of financial exploitation. And so I mentioned the nursing home scenario is a common example of financial exploitation of the elderly, but it isn't the only one. Home caregivers and other members of the community can financially abuse the elderly for forging signatures, stealing, misusing entrusted assets, and deceiving the person in any way for financial gain. And we've been hearing more and more of this, either in the news or online, where you get a phone call and an elderly person picks up the phone and they're asking for their social security number in order to check records or any wealth of things. And we're finding that more and more elderly individuals are falling for this type of financial exploitation. And I know here I follow Johnston County reports pretty often because I live in Johnston County, and I can tell you maybe twice a month there is a report that I end up reading that says that an elderly person has been financially exploited, again, either by over the phone, on the internet, or even in person, that you get someone that's coming around the house to do repairs, and they ask for the money up front, and they never return back to do the repairs on the home. And so it's quite sad that this one of our most vulnerable populations is being taken advantage of this way. And so the point of learning about the circumstances that affect different vulnerable populations is not to pigeonhole each individual, but to prepare those at work with them to apply appropriate interventions. Each case is unique, as we saw in each of these populations, in how the individual responds to their problems, but the problems themselves tend to be very consistent, right? Malnutrition among welfare recipients, or depression within the LGBTQ community across each group. When we combine thorough interviewing and assessment skills with thoughtful action, we can quickly and efficiently recognize common problems and solve them in a way that yields the best outcome for each individual. And for me, it really is a human rights issue. No one wants somebody else making decisions for them. So remembering that in every step of the way, we want to include that individual in the decision-making process, right? Ultimately, people want to be in control of their lives, although they may be vulnerable, although they may have been taken advantage of, although they may be, deep in depression, they still want to be able to make those most important decisions in their life and feel like they've got some sense of control over what is going on and happening to them on a day-to-day basis. And so that's always important to remember in the back of our minds. And so some of these, I wanted to just highlight a few of these resources to you. This is not an all-encompassing. I honestly did a quick search and wanted to just provide you all with some resources that could be available and useful to any of these 5 vulnerable populations. And so up top, you've got the Family and Community COVID-19 resources there. That has a wealth of information for anyone that may be struggling through the COVID-19. I think we're all struggling, but someone that needs resources during the COVID-19 pandemic. That NC211, it's an information and referral service provided by the United Way of North Carolina. So check that out if you are interested. And so this one is whether you're the next one is the NC Commerce. It's training resources and job seekers. And so they say whether you're a student fresh out of school, a veteran transitioning back to civilian life, a worker looking to make a change, or any other kind of job seeker, you'll find all the tools you need to help you land your next job in North Carolina at that website. The ARC of North Carolina is really great. They work alongside many organizations across the state, specifically those that deal with autism. Aunt Bertha, not sure if you all know Aunt Bertha, that is another useful online resource directory to assist with finding the right resources to meet people's needs, and that is completely free. The NC Child Care Resource and Referral Council, they can help families find early child care and education arrangements. You've got Orange County Community Resources there. That's Orange County nc.gov, and then they've got a whole page of community resources. And then finally, NC Care 360. It's the first statewide coordinated care network to better connect individuals to local services and resources. And so I live in Clayton. I did a quick Google search. I did a quick NC Care 360 search to find out what resources were available in Clayton, North Carolina, and 52 popped up. And so being able to kind of drill down and figure out what resources are local to me and my community, that's a really great one to be able to do that. And then I've included an article that, again, that talks to that last one, that rootsofaction.com. That's that article that spoke about teaching young people how to make mistakes. And so I wanted to include that as well as a resource. And so this concludes our working with at-risk population. I told you it was a bit shorter than our other former trainings, but I wanted to open up, we only had 9 participants today, but I wanted to open up in the chat box if you had comments or questions about any of our most vulnerable populations. Again, this is not all inclusive. We know that there are other vulnerable populations out there. I think someone did post the Muslim population or specific religious populations. Most certainly they are vulnerable as well. But we looked at and wanted to highlight kind of the 5 most vulnerable populations. Any questions for me? If not, I am going to say thank you so much. I will say that on Thursday, we have our second part coming up to our resilience film training. I'll say a month or so ago, I've lost track of time, but a month or so ago, we viewed the resilience film and had discussions surrounding the film. And this is our next steps to the resilience. So if you have an interest in resilience, in learning some tools to become resilient and being able to get those tools and then teach those tools to others, please join us on Thursday. And we'll be back here. And I think that's gonna be our last of our 10 trainings coming up on Thursday. So thank you so much. Thank you for spending your Tuesday afternoon with me. And again, I will email these, the slides, as well as the link to our video, and then a certificate that you all attended today's presentation. So again, thank you so much and have a great afternoon.